The blank cartridge incident. On March 31st, 1993, Brandon Lee arrived on set for another night of filming The Crow in Wilmington, North Carolina. The 28-year-old actor was the son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee, and this was supposed to be his breakthrough role. The scene called for his character to be shot as he walked into an apartment carrying groceries. His co-star, Michael Massey, would fire a revolver loaded with blank rounds. The crew had used the same gun earlier in production. Days before, they needed a close-up shot of the revolver loaded with bullets. The props department created dummy rounds by removing gunpowder from real cartridges, but leaving the primers and bullets in place. After filming the close-up, someone failed to fully clear the gun. A bullet tip broke loose and lodged itself inside the barrel. Nobody noticed. When the fatal scene began filming, the gun was loaded with blanks. Blank cartridges have gunpowder but no bullet. They create noise and flash but are not supposed to be lethal. The cameras rolled. Lee walked through the door holding a bag of groceries. Massey pulled the trigger from about 15 feet away. The blank fired with enough force to dislodge the bullet fragment stuck in the barrel. That fragment shot out like a real round and struck Lee in the abdomen. He fell backward. At first, the crew thought he was acting. Then they realized he was not getting up. Lee was rushed to New Hanover Regional Medical Center, where surgeons operated for 5 hours trying to save his life. The bullet had torn through his stomach and lodged near his spine. After 12 hours of fighting, Brandon Lee was pronounced dead on April 1st, 1993. He was 28 years old, the same age his father had been when he died. The film was nearly complete. After much debate, the producers decided to finish The Crow using a stunt double and digital effects. The movie was released a year later and became a cult classic, dedicated to Brandon and his fiancée. The accident led to stricter regulations around prop firearms in Hollywood. The helicopter crash incident. On July 23, 1982, director John Landis was filming a scene for Twilight Zone the movie in Indian Dunes, California. The sequence depicted a Vietnam War battle with a helicopter, explosions, and gunfire. In front of the camera stood 53-year-old actor Vic Morrow and 2 child actors, 7-year-old Micah Din Lei and 6-year-old Renee Shin Yi Chen. The scene required Morrow to carry both children across a river while a helicopter hovered overhead and explosives detonated around them. It was 2:20 in the morning. The production had hired the children illegally, violating child labor laws that prohibited minors from working at night or in scenes involving explosives. Landis wanted the shot done in one take. The helicopter descended to just 24 feet above the actors. Special effects coordinator Paul Stewart triggered a series of explosions meant to simulate mortar fire. One of the fireballs rose higher than planned. The heat and debris struck the helicopter's tail rotor. The pilot lost control instantly. The aircraft spun violently and began falling directly toward the 3 actors below. Morrow looked up and tried to shield the children. The helicopter's main rotor struck him first. The blade decapitated both Vic Morrow and Micah Din Lei instantly. The falling helicopter crushed 6-year-old Renee Chen beneath its wreckage. She died on impact. The entire disaster happened in less than 5 seconds. Crew members screamed. Some ran toward the wreckage while others stood frozen in shock. When rescue workers pulled the bodies from the water and debris, the scene was described as one of the worst accidents in Hollywood history. John Landis and 4 others were charged with involuntary manslaughter. The trial lasted 10 months. In 1987, all 5 defendants were acquitted, though they were found liable in civil court. The families of the children received settlements. The accident led to major reforms in how Hollywood handles child actors, pyrotechnics, and aerial stunts. Helicopter scenes now require multiple safety officers and strict distance protocols. The blank gun joke incident. On October 12, 1984, 26-year-old Jon-Erik Hexum was filming the television series Cover Up at 20th Century Fox Studios in Los Angeles. The show followed fashion photographers who were secretly CIA agents. Hexum played a male model and had recently become famous for his looks and charm. That afternoon, the production fell behind schedule. Between takes, Hexum grew bored waiting in his trailer. A prop gun loaded with blanks sat on a nearby table. Hexum picked up the .44 Magnum revolver and started playing with it. He spun the cylinder and joked with crew members. Then he put the gun to his right temple and said his last words. "Can you believe this? Let's see if I've got one for me. He pulled the trigger. The blank cartridge fired. Blanks contain gunpowder, but no bullet. However, the exploding gases exit the barrel with extreme force. When fired against the skull, the pressure alone can be deadly. The blast fractured Hexum's skull. A piece of bone broke off and shot into his brain like a bullet. He collapsed immediately. Hexum was rushed to Beverly Hills Medical Center. Doctors discovered massive bleeding inside his brain. He underwent 5 hours of surgery, but the damage was too severe. For 6 days, Jon-Erik Hexum remained on life support, brain dead. On October 18th, his mother made the decision to disconnect the machines. His heart, kidneys, corneas, and skin were donated to others. A 36-year-old man received Hexum's heart and lived. The tragedy shocked Hollywood. Hexum had not understood how dangerous blank guns could be at close range. After his death, productions began requiring safety briefings about prop weapons. Actors were taught that blanks can kill. Studios updated their firearms policies, and armorers started keeping stricter control over prop guns between takes. Jon-Erik Hexum's death was ruled accidental, but it became one of the clearest examples of how ignorance about prop safety can turn a joke into a fatal mistake. The train track incident. On February 20th, 2014, a film crew arrived at a railroad trestle over the Altamaha River in Wayne County, Georgia. They were shooting a scene for Midnight Rider, a biopic about musician Greg Allman. Director Randall Miller had chosen an active railroad bridge for a dream sequence. The production did not have permission from CSX Transportation to film on the tracks. Miller and his team knew a train schedule existed, but they believed they had enough time. Among the crew was 27-year-old Sarah Jones, a camera assistant from Atlanta. It was her first day working on the film. At 4:15 p.m., the crew spread a metal-framed bed on the tracks for the shot. Cameras and lights were positioned. Crew members stood on the narrow bridge over the river. Then someone yelled. A freight train was coming. The engineer had spotted people on the tracks and began sounding the horn. He hit the emergency brakes, but a freight train cannot stop quickly. The crew had less than a minute to clear the bridge. Some jumped into the river 20 feet below. Others ran along the tracks trying to reach solid ground. Sarah Jones tried to run. The train was traveling at 55 feet tapanpi when it struck her. She was killed instantly. The train also hit the metal bed frame, sending debris flying. 7 other crew members were injured, including a hairstylist who lost her arm. The train dragged equipment for a quarter mile before finally stopping. Miller immediately called 911, but Sarah Jones was already gone. Investigators found that the production had lied to property owners to gain access to the bridge. They had been denied a permit by CSX but filmed anyway. Director Randall Miller was charged with involuntary manslaughter and criminal trespassing. In 2015, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He served 1 year. The incident led to the Safety for Sarah movement in Hollywood, pushing for stronger on-set safety standards and giving crew members the right to refuse dangerous work without fear of being fired. The revolver loading incident. On October 21, 2021, actor Alec Baldwin was rehearsing a scene at Bonanza Creek Ranch near Santa Fe, New Mexico. The 63-year-old was starring in and producing Rust, a low-budget Western film. The production had been troubled from the start with complaints about safety and working conditions. That afternoon, Baldwin was practicing a scene inside a small church set. He wore period clothing and held a vintage Colt .45 revolver. The script called for him to draw the gun and point it toward the camera. Cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, 42 years old, stood behind the camera setting up the shot. Director Joel Souza stood behind her. Assistant director Dave Halls had picked up the revolver from a cart and handed it to Baldwin, announcing it was a cold gun, meaning it was safe and unloaded. Halls had not properly checked the weapon. The film's armorer, 24-year-old Hannah Gutierrez Reed, had loaded the gun earlier but failed to verify what type of ammunition was inside. During the rehearsal, Baldwin aimed the gun toward the camera. At approximately 1:50 p.m., he pulled the trigger. The revolver fired a live round. The bullet struck Hutchins in the chest and continued through her body into Souza's shoulder. Hutchins staggered backward and collapsed. The crew called 911 immediately. Hutchins was airlifted to University of New Mexico Hospital in Albuquerque. Doctors performed emergency surgery, but the damage was too severe. Halyna Hutchins was pronounced dead at 9:32 p.m. She left behind her husband and a 9-year-old son. Investigators found 6 live rounds mixed with dummy rounds on set. How real ammunition ended up on a movie set remains disputed. In 2023, armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 18 months in prison. Alec Baldwin was also charged, but his trial was dismissed in 2024 due to prosecution errors. The incident reignited debates about banning real firearms from film sets entirely. The Horsefall Incident. On September 19, 1988, actor Roy Kinnear was filming The Return of the Musketeers in Toledo, Spain. The 54-year-old British character actor had appeared in dozens of films but was known to be nervous around horses. The scene required him to ride across difficult terrain during a chase sequence. Kinnear had expressed concerns to director Richard Lester about performing the stunt himself. He was not an experienced rider, and the ground was uneven. Lester encouraged him to continue, assuring him it would be safe. A stunt coordinator was present, but the decision was made for Kinnear to do the riding himself. The cameras rolled. Kinnear rode his horse across the rocky landscape. The horse lost its footing on a slope. Kinnear fell from the saddle and hit the ground hard. He lay on the ground in severe pain. The fall had broken his pelvis. He was rushed to a hospital in Madrid where surgeons performed an operation to repair the fracture. The surgery appeared successful. Kinnear was placed in recovery. However, the following day, September 20th, complications developed. He suffered a heart attack brought on by the trauma and stress of the injury. Doctors tried to revive him, but Roy Kinnear died 24 hours after the fall. He was 54 years old and left behind a wife and 3 children. His daughter, actress Kirsty Kinnear, later stated that her father should never have been asked to perform that stunt. The family filed a lawsuit against the production company. Director Richard Lester later said the accident haunted him for the rest of his life. The incident raised questions about when actors should be required to perform their own stunts and when trained professionals should be used instead. The Return of the Musketeers was completed using a double for Kinnear's remaining scenes. The film was dedicated to his memory. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.